You know when you watch a pro golfer and their swing just looks so effortless,
Yeah.
but powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks simple, but underneath the surface, there's this incredible sequence of forces at play. Hidden forces, really.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. Those hidden forces specifically, ground reaction forces or GRF, in the golf swing.
Right. And, to really get a handle on how to unlock more power, more consistency, we're going digging into a really interesting discussion. It's led by Henrik Jentsch from Golf Academy 360 Degrees.
Oh, the Sportsbox AI 3D guys.
That's the one. He really gets into the nuts and bolts of how these forces, you've got lateral, which is sideways, rotational, the twisting,
Yep.
and vertical, so up and down, how they all need to work together, and crucially, in a very specific order.
Okay, so this sounds like something that could help a lot of golfers. I mean, if you've ever felt like you're just sliding around too much in your swing.
Or you're trying hard to shallow the club,
Yeah.
get it coming down on a better angle.
Yeah, that's a big one. Or maybe you keep hitting the ground behind the ball, sticking the club in the turf.
Exactly. If any of that sounds familiar, this deep dive should be really helpful because understanding GRF, it's not just like theory. It can genuinely lead to those aha moments.
And give you practical things to actually try.
Precisely. So our mission today really is to unpack the correct sequence and how to apply these ground reaction forces. Hendrik really hammers this point home.
Yeah.
It's not just that the forces happen, but the order. That sequence is key.
Like building something, you need the foundation first.
Yeah, good analogy. Foundation before walls. Get the order wrong, and, well, the structure isn't sound.
Okay, so let's get into that foundation. The sequence. Henrik lays it out pretty clearly, right? It's lateral first, then rotational, then vertical.
That's the order. Lateral, rotational, vertical.
Simple enough to say, but why? Why that specific order? What makes it so crucial?
Well, it comes down to what's often called the kinetic sequence, or kinetic chain. It's about how different parts of your body contribute power at the right time. Henrik stresses that this specific sequence, lateral, rotational, vertical, is how you maximize the force you deliver to the ball. Think about like cracking a whip.
Ah, yeah, the energy builds up along the length.
Exactly. Builds from the handle, sequentially, out to the tip for maximum speed. Same idea in the swing, building from the ground up. If you mess up the sequence, say you try to jump vertically too soon, or you rotate before you shift.
Then the whip doesn't crack properly.
Right. You leak energy, and the result, usually those shots you'd rather forget. Bad contact, loss of power, poor direction.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about that first one, lateral motion. Because I know a lot of golfers, myself included sometimes, have heard stop sliding. Lateral motion gets a bad rap.
It really does.
Yeah.
But Henrik argues it's not inherently bad. The problem is usually when it happens, not that it happens.
So it's about timing again.
Timing is everything here. That initial lateral move done correctly right at the start of the downswing is actually really important for shallowing the club.
Okay, so for anyone who's been working on getting that club on a better plane coming down, this initial shift is part of the solution.
It's a key piece of the puzzle, yeah. It helps get the club approaching the ball from the inside.
And we're not talking a massive, uncontrolled sway here, are we?
No.
No?
He describes it as more diagonal. For a righty, think moving from your right heel sort of towards the ball of your left foot.
Diagonal, not just straight sideways. That feels different.
It is, and it directly counters some common advice, You often hear people say, just open up the hips fast, early.
Clear the hips.
Right. But Henrik warns that if you rotate those hips too soon, before that little lateral shift,
What happens?
the club tends to get thrown over the top, outside the ideal path, leading to pulls, slices, weak contact, all that stuff.
So instead, this initial, maybe quite small, shift first to set a kind of pivot point.
Exactly. Establish that stable base on the lead side first. And he says this helps, well, he puts it bluntly, lower the effing arms.
Okay, gets the point across. It sets up the arm drop.
It really emphasizes how critical that first move is for sequencing everything else correctly.
Okay, so shift happens first. What's next in that kinetic sequence? We've shifted laterally.
Right. After that initial shift, then comes a push, the vertical force. This involves pushing off from the trail foot, the right foot for a righty, and extending the right leg, and importantly, the right arm through impact.
And why is straightening that right arm so important?
Henrik points out it's critical for squaring the club face.
Okay, so if you keep that right arm bent through the hit.
The club face is probably going to be open, and where does an open face send the ball?
To the right for a right-hander, the dreaded push or slice.
Exactly. So the sequence is clear. Little diagonal shift first, then the push and extension.
And it's a coordinated push, right? Not just one leg.
Absolutely. As you've shifted onto that lead side, the left side for a righty, you're pushing up with that left leg while also pushing through with the right leg. It's a dynamic movement.
What does the right leg pushing through achieve?
That helps get the left hip moving back and out of the way. Creates rotation, but also space.
Space for the arms and glide. And the left leg pushing up, what's its job?
That creates lift, more space vertically. It stops the club just dumping into the ground behind the ball. You know that feeling?
Oh, yeah. The chunk.
Yeah.
Fat shot. So the vertical push creates room to swing through cleanly.
Precisely. It lets the club bottom out in the right place, ideally just after the ball.
Yeah.
He uses a great analogy, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Think about trying to walk a long distance on your hands versus your feet.
Right. No contest.
Your legs are just so much stronger. Using them correctly, pushing off the ground, that's where a huge amount of power comes from in the swing. Way more than just your arms.
Okay, so recapping the leg action, Henrik uses 3 words. Shift, turn, and jump.
Yeah, captures the phases nicely. Shift laterally, turn rotationally, and then jump vertically. And he really emphasizes that initial shift have to be closed.
Close.
Meaning, for a right-hander, the direction of that initial shift is more towards the target line, not spinning open away from it immediately. That diagonal move we talked about.
Gotcha. That's a subtle but really important point. Okay, so that's the sequence. But then Henrik gets into something else really fascinating, how our individual bodies affect this.
Yeah, this is where it gets super practical and personalized. He talks about measuring yourself, basically,
Yeah.
to figure out the best setup for you to optimize these forces.
Right. Not just generic advice. So he starts with things like wingspan. How does arm length play into it?
Well, if your wingspan is long compared to your height, you'll likely stand a bit more upright naturally, more erect posture.
Okay, makes sense. So what does that mean for your swing?
A more upright posture generally leads to a flatter shoulder turn, kind of more around your body,
Uh-huh.
and a more upright arm swing, more up and down. If you don't know that's your natural tendency based on your build, you might fight it, trying to swing like someone built differently.
Trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly. It's about working with your body's geometry. He also mentions forearm length.
How does that affect things?
It influences where your trail arm, your right arm for a righty, naturally wants to fold up in the backswing.
Okay.
And where that right arm folds affects how high or low your hands get and the position of your left arm at the top. Again, small measurement differences can have a big impact on your swing shape.
It's like a chain reaction. So these upper body differences, wingspan, forearm length, they must require adjustments lower down too in the stance.
Absolutely. To maintain balance and create the leverage to use those ground forces effectively, your stance width might need tweaking based on your upper body.
Yeah.
Henrik has a cool way to find a good starting point for stance width.
Oh, yeah. Not just shoulder width apart.
He suggests jumping. Just like a little vertical jump and see where your feet naturally land to absorb the impact.
Interesting. Why jumping?
Because that landing position is generally where you're most stable and powerful, where you can naturally create ground force. So the main goal of your stance width isn't just looking balanced.
It's functional. It's about setting up to generate force from the ground.
That's the key idea. And based on your measurements in this jump test, he often finds that a slightly wider stance, maybe say 1.5 inches wider than you might normally stand, can actually help.
Wider helps. How?
It can make it easier to make that initial shift into the trail side in the backswing, and then crucially, shift back diagonally onto the lead side to start the downswing. That move we need for shallowing.
Ah, it facilitates the sequence. Okay. This leads nicely into another concept he discusses, pivot posts. Sounds interesting. What are they?
Think of it like the main axis your body rotates around during the swing. He identifies 3 main types.
Yeah.
Front, center, and rear.
Okay, break this down. Front pivot post.
A front post golfer tends to pivot more around their lead leg. Their weight stays maybe more centered, or even favors the front side a bit more throughout the swing.
And center.
They use their pelvis, kind of the hip area, as the main pivot point, more of a centered rotation.
And rear.
Rear post golfers shift more significantly into their trail side, the right side for a righty, in the backswing, using that right hip as a pivot point initially, then transferring and rotating around the left hip coming through.
And the crucial thing is, none of these are inherently right or wrong.
Exactly. It's about identifying what a golfer does naturally. You work with their tendency.
So how do you figure out someone's natural pivot post? You can't just ask them, presumably.
No. He suggests a simple visual check. Get the golfer into their setup, place a golf club across their thighs, holding it there,
Okay.
and then just have them pivot back like they're making a backswing. Watch how their weight moves and where that main rotation happens relative to the club on their thighs. It usually becomes pretty clear.
Clever. And he mentioned that even front post golfers who stay more left still have a little shift right.
Yeah, almost always. There's usually at least a small initial load into that trail side, even if they don't pivot fully around it.
Okay. And this pivot style links back to setup details, like foot flare.
It does. Generally, for a front post golfer, he suggests keeping the trail foot, the right foot, pretty square to the target line.
Why square?
It sort of encourages them to resist shifting too far right and helps them rotate around that lead side, which matches their pattern.
And for a rear post golfer,
For them, flaring the trail foot out slightly, pointing the toes away from the target bit, can be beneficial.
why the flare for them?
It allows for a bigger hip turn, more rotation into that trail side during the backswing, which suits their rear pivot preference. Makes it easier to load into that right hip.
Makes sense. What about knees? He mentioned knee tracking.
Yeah, just a general guideline that your knees should track more or less in the direction your toes are pointing during the backswing.
To avoid strain.
Pretty much. Avoids putting unnecessary twisting force on the knee joint, keeps things aligned, and allows for a freer rotation. As he jokes, you don't want a different kind of deep dive with your orthopedist.
Definitely not. Okay, he also touched on physical limitations. Like, what if someone physically can't make a certain move? He mentioned shoulder rotation.
Right, external shoulder rotation. That's your ability to rotate your upper arm outwards, if that's limited, especially in the lead arm or trail shoulder.
So left arm or right shoulder for a righty.
Correct. If that's tight, it can really restrict how far back you can swing the club. It limits your backswing depth.
So what's the workaround? Just swing shorter.
Not necessarily. Henrik offers a really neat setup adjustment. He suggests dropping the trail foot, the right foot again, back slightly away from the target line at address.
Dropping it back, how does that help?
He calls it buying depth.
Mhm.
By slightly changing the angle of your stance, you create more space for your torso and arms to rotate back, effectively compensating for that limited shoulder rotation.
Ah, clever. So a setup tweak can overcome a physical limitation.
And importantly, it still allows you to make that crucial diagonal shift and sequence the ground forces correctly, even with a limitation.
It really does all tie together, doesn't it? The measurements, the pivot style, the limitations, they all feed back into crafting the right setup.
Exactly. The setup stance width, foot flare, maybe dropping a foot back, it's all designed to make accessing and sequencing those ground reaction forces as natural and efficient as possible for your body.
And if you get that setup right for you,
Henrik suggests that initial shift back in the backswing almost becomes automatic. It just flows naturally from your starting position as you initiate the swing.
and then it all leads to that final piece, the push off the ground, the extension through impact, especially that left leg driving up.
That powerful drive through the ball. That's the culmination of sequencing those forces correctly from the ground up.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. This has been a fascinating deep dive. The big takeaway seems to be this critical sequence for GRF lateral first.
Right, that initial diagonal shift to help shallow the club,
Then rotational power.
turning the body.
And finally, that vertical force. The push, the jump, creating lift and space for power and clean contact.
And remembering that the initial lateral move isn't the enemy. It's essential when timed, right at the start of the downswing.
Yeah, that's a big myth busted. And the power coming from the legs, pushing off the ground, not just the arms.
Huge power source.
Mm.
And maybe the most actionable part is understanding how your own body, your measurements, your natural pivot should influence your setup. It's not one size fits all.
Absolutely. It really connects the dots on common problems, doesn't it? If you feel like you slide too much, maybe that lateral move is happening late, out of sequence.
Or if you're constantly hitting it fat, sticking the club in the ground, maybe you're not using that vertical push from the legs enough to create that upward lift in space.
Those aha moments we talked about.
Definitely. Which leads to a final thought, maybe something for listeners to chew on.
Go for it.
Just take a moment next time you think about your swing or you're at the range. Consider your own body and how these forces might apply to you. Feel that initial little shift. Experiment with it. Or focus on that feeling of pushing the ground away through impact, extending upwards with that lead leg. How does that feel? Does it change anything? Maybe this discussion sparks some ideas. Maybe you watch some videos on GRF or even consider getting your own swing analyzed to see your specific force patterns.
See how you can optimize your sequence for more power, more consistency, food for thought.
Absolutely. It's all about understanding how to use the ground better.